Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, very good. I am Becky Pringle. I am the Secretary-Treasurer of the National Education Association, and this is a very exciting day for me. But it's not about me. It is about the incredible work that the members and the staff and the leaders of the NEA have done in our persistent march toward achieving our vision of great public schools for every single student in this country. And so this day actually represents for us a landmark. We started this journey quite a while ago when the delegates, 10,000 delegates to our national convention, came together shortly after the passage of the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act back in 2002 and renamed No Child Left Behind. Our folks got together and said, this is not good for our kids, and we need to start working right away to identify what is good for kids, because we can't just say no. This is wrong, this is stupid, this is crazy. Can't just say that. As practitioners, as educators, we have to say what is right for our kids, what they need, every one of them, to be successful. And so we rolled up our sleeves and we got to work. We went all over this country talking to teachers, talking to education support professionals, talking to external partners, to everyone who wanted to engage with us in a conversation about what a great public school actually looks like. What are the characteristics that it absolutely must have so that not one of our students gets left behind, but every one of them has the resources they need to be successful. And so after all of those discussions, we went back to our representative assembly, our convention, in 2005, and we presented to them our positive agenda for great public schools. And in that positive agenda, we took a look at those factors that we said had to be present in every single school for it to be successful. This a little journey that started a long time ago has come to fruition today, and actually taking that next step in quantifying even qualitative data so that we're able to develop metrics and measures on whether or not a school is moving forward and toward being what we are characterizing as a great public school. So we are so excited that you have taken out time to join us here today to not only talk with us about what you think about the indicators that we have ultimately come up with to measure what a great public school is, but we thought we would invite you for an intimate conversation with some pretty fabulous folks, who I'll introduce in just a minute, to talk with us about what this could mean for them and the people that they represent. So I want to begin by just taking you through this journey of ours so you have an idea of how we came to where we are today. I always like to talk to folks who come to the NEA, and even those who are internal to the NEA, about the incredible and aspirational and powerful mission that we have taken on, our 3 million members have taken on, and that is to advocate for education professionals and unite not just our members, but the entire nation to fulfill the promise of public education. And that promise has got to be about making sure that every single student is successful in this increasingly interdependent and global society. And so that's what we're about. That's why we exist. We are specifically focused, which is characterized in our vision, on making sure that there's a great public school for every single student. So that's where we're grounded, and that's what this work is about. We actually believe that this has to be a movement. It's time now, it's time to storm the castle. That's what we're doing. So we are beginning a movement. And that movement, as all movements, requires that everyone takes their rightful place from wherever they are, and you'll hear that reflected in the group of folks that we have gathered here together, from wherever they are standing up and taking responsibility for us being able to achieve this vision. And this vision is about a student-centered approach. Not all of the reforms that we have been saddled with are student-centered. They might be well-intentioned, but they're not really student-centered. And that's why we haven't had the success for every child that we are aiming to have. To try to capture the work that we are now moving toward, we actually began an initiative at our convention this year called Raise Your Hand, and we are reaching out internally and externally to our 3 million members, our 51 state affiliates, our 4,000 plus locals, to raise their hands, to lead their professions in this important work that we are taking on. There are 4 pillars of this work that we are centering everything around, and that, of course, begins with ensuring that we have successful students. It's why the NEA and its members have really stepped up and embraced trying to ensure that we have a common sense approach to the Common Core. And we are working very, very hard with an incredible work group throughout this country to make that happen. We, of course, can't make any of this happen unless we have accomplished professionals. At every end of the teacher quality continuum, as well as the other professionals who work in our schools. We know that if we're going to lead in our professions, our leaders have to be empowered to step up. We have to train them. We have to provide them with the resources so that they are ready to take on this work in new and different ways. And then, of course, we know we can't do it alone. And by we, I mean the NEA here at 1201. So we have to reach out and collaborate with our states and our locals and our members, and we have to reach out beyond the members of the NEA to our external partners because we know we need every hand on deck to make this happen. So what does it take to ensure great public schools? That is our threshold question, and it's what led to this positive agenda that ultimately started as the reauthorization of ESEA, but has now grown so far past that as we take a look at all the policies that are impacting our schools at every single level, from the local to the state to the federal government. We identified 7 characteristics of great public schools. We, first of all, know that all students need to come to school every day prepared to learn. For that to happen, we have to surround them with quality programs and services. We know that we have to hold expectations high, and to do that, we have to have rigorous standards. That's why we're so excited about the Common Core, and we have to have a comprehensive curriculum. We know that what happened after the passage of No Child Left Behind, for those students that needed the most rich and deepest curriculum, they were the ones that were shortchanged with narrowing of that curriculum. So the curriculum has to be comprehensive. We have to have and pay attention to quality conditions for both teaching as well as lifelong learning. And of course, we have to have a qualified workforce that is caring and is diverse. Shared responsibility. Lots of talk since the passage of No Child Left Behind around accountability. But it can't just be accountability of teachers. It can't just be accountability of schools. It's got to be accountability of all of the adults in the system, in the entire system, to make sure that we bring to our schools what they need so that every student is successful. Parental engagement is paramount. And we have to go beyond parental engagement. We have to reach out to our communities and leverage their assets so that we can surround our students with what they need to be successful. And then finally, you know, we can hold, and I'm sure Stella will talk about this, you know, we can hold all the cookie drives we want to. But if we do not address the inadequate system of funding of our public schools, then we can't do any of this. You know, we can't do it on the cheap. We have got to invest in our kids to invest in the future of this country. So those are the 7 criteria that we adopted and that we are working toward. Now, you got, when you came and at your tables, you'll see the GPS framework that surrounds these 7 criteria. And in that framework that we have developed, you will see that we have worked very hard to try to attach metrics to them. We realized that we needed to answer this question with some measures that helped us really identify what schools were moving and which weren't towards these great public schools. And so we developed this framework to try to answer that question. This framework is designed for policymakers to use, for educators and advocates, so that they have a framework to actually evaluate how well our states are doing, how well our districts are doing, how well our federal government is doing to do their part to ensure the success of every single school. In this framework, you will see that it has sub-criteria that correspond to each one of those 7 GPS indicators that I went through. These sub-criteria represent those critical areas of policy or practice that are related to the criteria and those that are followed by the indicators that actually determine the extent to which states and districts and schools address that GPS criteria. So you will see as we go throughout, and I hope that you will be ready to ask any questions as you go throughout that document, those sub-criteria that we can use to evaluate and then begin to move and advocate for what our schools actually need to have happen. The ultimate goal of all of this, of these GPS criteria, is to make sure that every student is prepared with 21st century skills. So they're critical thinkers, they are problem solvers, they have technical literacy, they can communicate effectively. Those are the 21st century skills that we need them to have. You know, not a lot is talked. We talk a lot about achievement, and usually that boils down to, scores on a test. We know that it has to be much more than that. We have to create lifelong learners. We have to create learners who are enthusiastic about their learning, and they take responsibility for their own learning, far beyond the classroom, far beyond the time when they graduate from our schools. We have to focus specifically on those students who are in greatest need and moving closer to finally closing those achievement gaps. And then finally, of course, we have to ensure that our educators and our schools have the resources they need to be successful. So those are the goals of our criteria, and we're so glad that you joined us here today to have a really important discussion of them so that you can inform your thinking from your place in the world of education, and so that you can help inform our thinking as we take our next steps. So let's begin by meeting our illustrious panel. We are joined this morning by Martin Blank. Marty is the president of the Institute of Education Leadership, and he is the director of the Coalition for Community Schools. Sitting next to Marty is Stella Edwards. She is the Legislation Committee Chair for the National Parent Teacher Association, the PTA. And sitting next to Stella is Chanel Hardy, who is the Senior Vice President for Policy for the National Urban League and the Executive Director of the National Urban League Policy Institute. And then finally, we have joining us Dr. Ivory Toldson, who is the Associate Professor of Counseling Psychology at the Howard University. He is a Senior Research Analyst of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and he is the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Negro Education and the Deputy Director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Can you hear me with this? No? You can't hear me? No. That's funny. They can hear me, I wonder why. So we're just going to have an intimate conversation. You can join us. Are these on? These aren't on either. Is this one on? Okay. All right, can you hear me? Oh, okay, very good, very good. So I'm going to begin, Marty, with you. I want you to talk a little bit about the reality that, we're in a constant state of change right now, and probably in every aspect of our society, but particularly in the world of education. And we know that when we have rapid change going on, that our students in communities of greatest need often do get left behind, and we are challenged as a society to address issues of equity and access and opportunity. How do we go about, from your perspective, advocating for and achieving those indicators around, particularly around school readiness and workforce quality and diversity and adequate funding?
That's a pretty big question, Becky.
I know, and if you can give us the answer.
Well, you know, when you started out, I was about to recommend to all of our colleagues a little book that I just read called The Chaos Imperative. And it's a book by an organizational consultant who's been working with the military. And the military has had to shift from what used to be rules of war, for those of you who remember Clausewitz, to now operating in total chaos. Right? And that means that the institution has to become less rigid, more permeable, more connected, more engaging, create more space for people to think together, for, if you will, unusual suspects to be able to be part of the conversation, whether it's teachers or your paraprofessional community or citizens as well. So for me, in the work that we do, it's absolutely essential to think about advocacy at the school level, at the community level, at the state and the federal level. At the school level, we need to think about how teachers and principals work with parents, work with community leaders, work with community partners who have resources and assets and expertise. And they all need to stand up together for the education of their children, and they need to stand up not only for better school funding, but for all the other supports that children need. I know that's always difficult, but we need those people to be connected at the school level and connected to networks at the community level. They're going to take responsibility for their children. You know, Daniel Goldman wrote recently that our society is becoming less empathetic, that the greater the inequity, the less the connectivity that people have to the children, to all of our children, and to the most vulnerable children and children who suffer from inequities. So we've got to be able to tell that story and bring all those people together at the community level, and then take that capacity and move it to the state and federal level. So we've got to all be connected, and as you suggest, it's a broader movement, but in a sense, everybody has a movement now. I think I have a movement. There's an after-school movement. Does anybody else in the audience think they have a movement? So the power here is the connectivity of the nodes of movements to something larger than what we all are doing as individuals and as individual organizations.
Thank you, thank you. Chanel, I'm going to ask you, you know, the National Urban League has a history of expertise in providing wraparound services, which absolutely get at our first criteria around providing programs and services so the kids come to school every single day, ready to learn. Talk a little bit about the ways in which the Urban League can and has partners with local schools, and certainly your role in policy. How can we think about policy in a way that helps us with the connectedness that Marty talked about, that helps us around those kids with the services they need?
So, thank you, Becky. I think that for the National Urban League, one of the things our 95 affiliates in 36 states and 300 communities take great pride in is the fact that they are trusted voices, trusted partners in the community for parents. And so that means that very often a family, sometimes a whole family, sometimes an individual comes to the National Urban League for help on one matter. They're about to lose their house due to foreclosure, or they need to get their child enrolled in Head Start. And they end up getting the opportunity to walk through all of the programs and services that may be offered, from everything from job training services to job placement services to out-of-school feeding programs during the summer. And so we really know that we serve as a resource to communities to meet the wide range of needs that they might have. I think the opportunity there for schools, partnering with the National Urban League is to have another partner that can help to bridge the gap in communicating some of these big ideas. So when we have a framework like this is useful for us policy folks, but we want to make it resonate with the communities. And ultimately, if student success is the goal, then we need parents to be fully aware of what we're talking about and able to recognize that we are, in fact, on the same page about meeting the needs of their students. A couple of things I thought about are, we just released a survey yesterday that we partnered with National Voices, the National Voices Project, to look at perceptions of adults who work with children in the school setting, parents, teachers, and volunteers, and how they see student preparation for academic success and economic success. And unsurprisingly, we saw that there's a lot of awareness and perception that there is significant differences based on race and economic disparities. And so some of the findings that we had coming out of that are that community-based partners can help to break down and explain things on the ground, that educational requirements need to be communicated clearly, often, and in multiple formats, and that it's necessary to take the realities of parents' lives into consideration. So, for example, I taught 5th grade for a couple of years. I'll never forget one of my best students. Her mother came to see me once. She said, "I won't be coming back because I know you're a great teacher, so I don't need to worry." There was another parent who also said, "You won't be seeing me. I know you're a great teacher. I work 3 jobs to support my family. You won't be seeing me." So this is the example of the students, parents with students who are doing very well and who are extremely invested in their children's success and yet haven't made the connection that is critical for them to be engaged with the school. So making sure that we're making that outreach as easy as possible. And finally, as we're developing parent and community engagement plans, to be really cognizant of some of these challenges.
Thank you, Chanel. Stella, so I think you can certainly talk and a little bit, a lot, I'm sure, about the importance of parental engagement. So you can start there, certainly, but I'd like for you to talk a little bit about some of the things that Chanel just said around parents becoming disengaged. Usually we hear about parents disengaged because we're not, as teachers, we're not contacting them, we're only contacting them when their child is in trouble and they are working 3 jobs, and that's your job as a teacher to deal with that. That's not my job. But talk a little bit about how, your organization is working to keep parents engaged and to explain to them the importance of being involved in the school. And certainly, while the PTA may not be their area around policy that Chanel was talking about, what could their role be in making sure that we have that the work that we're doing that you see reflected in the indicators is actually moving forward through policy?
Thank you. Once again, very interesting questions. But once again, thank you so much for having me here, or us here, representing the National PTA. It almost inevitably, everywhere I go, people will say, "Oh, there is a national PTA," because generally associate PTA with their local unit. We are a national organization, 501c3, non-partisan, non-sectarian organization who've been around for 117 years, so a lot of traction there, if you will. Over 4 million members in every state in the United States, District of Columbia, of course, and our Department of Defense schools in Europe, Puerto Rico, Latin America. So we're out there everywhere in more ways than one, and at every level of a child's education, from the local level to districts, of course at the state level and nationally. And we have federal policies. We have a public policy agenda, and I would encourage all of you to go to pta.org to take a look at some of the work that's out there. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask a little question before I get started in answering your question. How many people out here are actually members of PTA? Would you raise your hand, please? Okay, it's okay. I'm not going to ask you anything else. Okay, very good. Usually I ask a question, and there are always members of PTA in every audience that I'm in, working at various levels, different levels of the organization, or just members. But what I want people to know, for one thing, the mission of the PTA is all about making sure every child is able to reach their full potential. And in addition to speaking up for children and parents and communities and providing relevant resources for them, and just being advocates for, we are an advocacy organization. We still do bake a few cookies from time to time, but advocacy is our work, it's our legacy, and it is what we do. Speaking of cookies, when our members talk about fundraising, which is not in our mission, but it's something that we do because we have a love for education, we have a love for children, we have a love for teachers. We do have a big T in PTA. What we find is that we have to inform them that it's good to do these kinds of things, raise money from time to time when it's needed. But more importantly, if a school is lacking in resources of any nature, the first thing they need to do is really be a part of the decision-making, be at the school board, advocating for the funding for that item that the school is lacking before they go out and actually raise money for any particular thing. We actually have a little guide. It's called 3 for 1. Any one fundraiser, there should be 3 programs attached to that. But in the PTA, we have what is called our Family Engagement and Education Act of 2013. And as you may know, there has been rather little going on in Congress in the last few years, to say the least. But we're happy to say that this summer, the Family Engagement and Education Act of 2003 was actually introduced in the House and Senate, and we're still seeking sponsors for that. And of course, we will be looking to National Education Association to help us with that. But in terms of families, we know that the research demonstrates that family engagement and the importance of it, that it helps in student achievement, it helps make sure students are in front of teachers, it helps with absenteeism, of course, graduation rate increases, and also reducing, dropout. So that's critically important. But this act, I want to say, is one of those measures that we have in place that will help to build capacity for parent and family engagement within our communities, in our school, within our schools. So that's something that I think is pretty critical and will lend itself to a number of other partnerships with other organizations and with community stakeholders. And speaking of partnerships being that number one thing between parents and families and school is terribly critical. So we provide resources to our members. And I say our members, but also keep in mind, we have a very large outreach beyond members. Members would be a parent who's also an attorney, who also is in a church. And so the reach in terms of information, in terms of education and training, is far more reaching than just our members.
Thank you, Stella. And I'm going to ask Ivory some question, but I want you particularly, I'm going to come back to you next, but I want everyone to talk a little bit more about this. But when you talked about the advocacy of your parents and educating them about the importance of that as well, and the work that you're specifically doing, the family, what's it called, the Family Act? What's it called?
Yeah, the Family and Education Engagement Act.
Okay,
Engagement Act. That's out there right
now. How these GPS indicators could help your parents in terms of giving them something very focused on to advocate for, and the intersection with the Engagement Act as well. So just think about that a minute. I want to go to Ivory and get his voice in the room. So Ivory, you have actually produced 2 really notable reports, Breaking Barriers and Breaking Barriers 2, which analyzed a variety of academic success indicators and call for very specific strategies to fully realize the academic potential, specifically of our Black males. I want you to talk a little bit about where you see intersections of the NEA's GPS indicators in the work you're doing.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. And I've used NEA's work for quite some time. Going back to my first Breaking Barriers report, I cited NEA heavily when I talked about how do we deal with problems with gangs and school violence, because I think that NEA always has a heart in the work that appears to be absent from what we see coming out of policy, particularly what comes from legislation. When I heard about the GPS indicators, I was very, very excited about that because as I go around and consult with schools, and typically I consult with individual schools. Sometimes I consult with districts. Rarely do I consult with states. So when I consult with schools, they're constantly asking, how do we make our school better? Overall, they want to know, how do we make our school better? And the GPS indicators, I think, has a lot of elements in it that speak to what makes a school great. But I do think there's a bit of a disconnect between what the indicators are saying and what teachers and school administrators need. I think that it's probably written for the state, and since I haven't worked that much on a state level, it's hard for me to speak to that. But who I do work with are individual teachers, individual schools that want to rise above what's going on in their districts. I've always been more interested in looking within groups than between groups. I think looking between groups confuses us a lot. So if we compare, this district to that district, and we see one district is performing better than the second district, that really doesn't tell us much. But if I look in that low-performing district and look at the variance in the individual schools, and I see this outlier, like if I go to Baltimore and I want to talk about disproportionality and suspensions, and I look at their schools and I see that we have this school who has suspended about 120 different kids in 1 year, which is appalling. But then you have this other school with similar demographics, and they've only suspended 5 kids in 1 year. I've actually seen that grade of variance. And so when I reveal those types of things and are able to talk to the collective, then I'm able to ask, well, what is this school doing different than that school? What do you know about these two different schools? And then that's when I hear the real strategies come out. So what I think would be helpful as we move forward with GPS, because I think that the elements in it are very, very important. We deal with culture, and we deal with community engagement, we deal with connection to the parents. But if it were to evolve into a companion guide that individual schools could use and say, these are the things that I can do at my school to make my school great and be compatible with these GPS indicators, I think that would take us in the right direction. As far as its connection to my work on black males, I do think that the elements in the GPS, particularly those dealing with community engagement, my research clearly shows that when schools are connected to the community, they act in the best interest of young black males. Parent engagement is a very, very important thing. Having equity as far as discipline is very important, and cultural relevance is important. All of these things are things that we suggested. So I think that the spirit is there, but as far as the strategies, I think is absent. And the more and more I work in this space, the more cynical I become about the amount that a state can actually influence the system. So I think the states can evaluate what's going on, but the real change comes from those individual school administrators, the principals that come in and they transform the school. And I haven't seen a state that can't produce a high-performing school, but it's hard for me to find a model state too. So I think that the reason why we're not finding these model states is because we're looking too much at macro level type ways of managing a system and not really getting in there and seeing who's doing what works and try to spread that out to the collective.
Well, that was provocative. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce the Director of our Education Policy and Practice Department, Donna Harris Aikenstein. Would you stand up and wave your hand? Probably many people. Give her a hand. She's fabulous. So I did that at this moment in time, so it's not just a conversation between me and Donna, now you know her. So I hope you are taking copious notes, Donna, because that was really, Ivory, that was really, really helpful to us, because that's what this conversation is about. And let me also invite folks from the audience, if you have questions of the panelists, please by all means come up to the mic. So I could not agree more with what you just said. I mean, we know that we're not, making great public schools for every student from 1201 16th Street. Not going to happen. And it's really why, when we took this work on, we went directly to our members, and they came up with it. And so as you look at where we are at this moment in time, for you to see it just as a state policy piece, and certainly it is, that's some thinking we need to do, because we need it to be seen as local policy, as a local policy piece too. So when Stella, is talking with her local chapters and she's organizing folks around what they need to advocate for, we need them to see this as a helpful guide. So I like that, the concept of developing some kind of a companion piece, Donna. I know you have nothing else to do, but if you'll make a note of that, please. Because we need it. We need it to speak to you wherever you are, whether it's in your individual school, or it's your district, or it is the state, or heaven forbid it's the federal government. You're talking about the state not having, oh my goodness. But as I talk to teachers around the country, what they need us to do for them, they need us to clear the way of the stupid and the crazy. Those are technical terms, folks. Really, seriously, and they need to find in their communities what speaks to them, what piece of this they're gonna go after. And if we can be helpful in that way, in kind of framing it up for them, and then they need to make it their own, then we need to do that. So I really appreciate that, your thoughtful help with that. So Stella, I'm going to come back to you and talk to us a little bit about, how you see the indicators being used at that local level, but also the national work that you're doing.
Thank you. Very interesting comments.
Yeah.
And immediately I was thinking about the indicators as the title states, a framework. It was good to see the actual very specific kinds of things that can be used in determining standards. And that's what really resonated with us, the standards that are set. And parents, and I want to say parents, community people, stakeholders in general, they want to know that there are standards that they can understand, standards that they can measure or rally around and hold people accountable for. Even within, under formerly No Child Left Behind, there are requirements for family and school partnerships and engagement, whatever. But what was lacking was the how-to and what that really looked like. And this framework helps to give some continuity to determining what those standards might look like for local, for state, as well for federal when it comes to particular legislation. And as I always say, there is no education without legislation in our country today. So the policy part of this, the legislative part of this is very critical, and to have this kind of framework. So we certainly see it as possibly supporting the legislation that we have out there on the table, and actually the legislation actually supporting this framework as well.
Okay, that's good.
I would want to support that, and also Ivory's comment. As we look at what's happened in the education sphere in the last 10 or 15 years, the drivers of change are, in a sense, for the kind of thing I think that that the NEA wants and that we would want at IEL and the Coalition for Community Schools is inherently local. The schools are trying to change, communities are trying to partner with their schools. We've gotten this top-down framing from No Child Left Behind, and frankly, too much, I think, structure and from our friends in this administration. And so people need to be able to figure out what to do at various levels, because there's a parent in the school, there is a principal, there is a superintendent, there are urban league presidents, there are PTA chapter presidents, there are community organizers that are challenging our public schools to get better, and a host of other institutions. So I think that's really important, because we had a conversation recently with the former Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, Paul Reville. And he indicates, his perspective is that partnership will be the fuel, the engine for change in public education. Because the schools aren't resourced anymore to do what we need. Okay, now we have to fight that battle in a very aggressive way, and I think California's new financing law helps us in that regard, and we can talk a little more about that if you like. But we also have to be able to garner the assets and resources of our communities. It is the Urban League, but it's the Urban League in partnership with the PTA, in partnership with the university, in partnership with the health institutions and the community organizing groups. That is what, if that network of people can use these indicators as a tool for external partners to understand school better, okay? I once sat with an organizer in Chicago, and she said, before I touched a public school, I spent a year figuring out the territory. Because I knew the culture of the school was different from my culture as an organizing group, and certainly from the culture of other institutions as well. So we've got to give people that set of tools to enable them to function at these multiple levels with partnership as a much more sharper focus and an even stronger emphasis on leadership. I mean, that was one of the places where I would hope that if you continue to move, you can think about the framework, because I think great public schools and a GPS is a wonderful construct. But we've got to have leaders who can function this way, right? It's a very different kind of principal. It's a very different kind of superintendent. It's a very different kind of community leader who can help move these kinds of things forward.
Excellent, and I think my microphone's working, right? So I just passed off the mic because I like that Marty just jumped right in there. So you guys have mics, just jump in there. I'm a middle school teacher, so I think I can control this a little bit if if it gets too out of hand. I have a back room back there. Chanel, so Ivory started with us being a critical friend, and I want you to do the same. We're particularly concerned about the diversity in the teaching ranks, and so we want you to look, and we know that you've done work in that as well. So I want you to talk to us a little bit about whether you think the criteria, the indicators do enough to try to not only lift that up and shine a light on it, but to encourage our schools to move more in that direction or not, and talk to us about ways you think that could be enhanced.
So the thing that I actually corrected myself as I was sitting up here is when I had read through this a few times, I missed the piece that actually talked about diversity in a couple spots. So if anything, I would say just making that even more prominent. So for example, we know that right now 41% of our students are of color and only 17% of our teachers are. So, and I recognize that by indicators we have a percentage, let's say, we're looking at percentage of districts with plans to recruit educators from underrepresented populations. I think that it could be powerful to kind of switch that around and make it a goal that districts would have teacher populations that are more reflective of their student populations. Because as Ivory's already mentioned, the indicators in everything from high school dropout rates to teacher retention and reducing attrition to student achievement, graduating from high school on time. All of those things are improved by teachers who represent the populations of their students. And so we think it's something that's important enough that it should be extremely prominent, and that there's an important role to play in terms of recruitment. And I think that that gets to really what is, I would say, the energy and the urgency of the national education reform conversation. I think that a lot of, and you know, I know that this is a scary thing to say in this room, but I was a Teach for America Corps member. So I am both an insider and outsider on that. In my working with them over the years on the way that they've approached diversity, from when they were threatened by the concept that you recognize that there's a value in diversity, matching the student population, to recognizing that it's the goal, I think that what they have managed to do is make teaching sexy for young, bright leaders. And I think that that's really critical, particularly for diverse communities, because so many of us come from a history where the only options for educated people of color were teaching and a good government job. And so to make it, especially since we're still fighting battles around teacher salaries that need to be more reflective of the work that teachers do, and teacher incentives, particularly teachers who are in high poverty areas and high minority populations. We need to do some things to just capture the energy around teaching for diverse populations, particularly if we're going to be able to get black male teachers in. And I think that that should be a key piece of the work in the indicators, because I would hate to cede that territory to others to claim. So I think that that's a key piece. Overall, I think I would just echo the comments of my colleagues on the stage that these are great indicators. I think that ultimately translating it down to the ground is about saying, if we meet all of these indicators and any student is not prepared for college, work, and life when they graduate from school, it doesn't matter if we've given ourselves an A on everything. And so being able to talk to students, parents, legislators, and make sure that they know that we recognize the urgency of now, I think is a key piece of the education conversation, because I think we are focusing a lot on extremely important things that we know need to happen. But ultimately, even if we get all of these things in place in 10 years, 20 years, that will mean a lot of students that didn't get what they needed in the interim. And I think that we need to make clear that we are just as concerned about that as the students and their parents are.
Well said. Go ahead, Stella. I think we need to make sure we're looking at the GPAs as indicators, as they are, actually indicators. They're providing stakeholders at every level with the potential for being able to specifically identify actionable kinds of things within the local level, within the state, and the federal level as well. Certainly it helps in our work, as we have out in the field, national standards for family and school partnerships. And there are 6 standards in that framework. One is welcoming all families, into the school. One of those things that will enable parents to be more comfortable, communities to be more comfortable, feel valued in the community. We have communicating effectively, teaching members and stakeholders how to do that, how to be effective communicators, understanding that partnership you have with a teacher if you're a parent or a parent parentis, supporting student success, the kinds of things we do to engage families and heighten student achievement. And then there's speaking up for every child. It's a method of becoming just an effective advocate for children and their education. Sharing power, being at the table, understanding what it means to be at the table, not to allow yourself to be in a position where you're the token parent family representative, and it really is very insignificant. agent. You're just a placeholder, and understanding how not to let that happen, to actually be able to provide some credible input, and then collaborating with the community. So these are resources. These are just not standards that are out there. They're driven by the idea that every school that actually goes through this process becomes a school of excellence, and that's promoted that way, and we know what that means to be a school of excellence under family and school partnerships.
Not to belabor this local point, but I think the meat is all here, but if I were a principal, what I would value is your school a great public school? And how could I sit with my parents, with my teachers — I'm going to make you a teacher, Chanel, for the moment — with my higher education partners who are helping with professional development and bringing tutors and mentors into the school, with other community partners, and use this as a vehicle for talking that through? If I'm a state-level person or a superintendent, there's another way to take a look at it. And so, am I a great public school? Am I a great public school district? Are we a great public school district? And are we do everything at the state level to support our public schools? So from a point of view of the practicality and the application of what is a wonderful set of indicators, I would encourage you to think about it, because that's the kind of thing that we could more readily and use in our network of folks who associate with us. You know, we don't own any schools, we don't run a program. The Coalition is an advocacy organization, and the Institute is a policy and research and leadership organization. But that kind of tool that could actually be used across these indicators would, I think, be an even bigger contribution and stronger contribution than what you've already accomplished here with this framework, Becky.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Ivory, you have something to say, and good. I was going to ask you a question, so you can.
Oh, you can go ahead.
No, you say what you want to say. But Chanel, you really challenged us, as did Marty as well, around partnerships. And Chanel challenged us to, no matter how great this is and how well we incorporate even your suggestions, that we have to always stay focused on what it's about, and that is every student's success. And so that's a huge challenge. And for us, we really wrestled with figuring out how the indicators could really capture and help us as an organization, but challenge at every level folks to move toward really getting at that opportunity and equity and access piece. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we may be able to, strengthen these as we take our next steps to try to get at that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that ultimately what's good for one group is good for all. And a lot of the disparities we see are not because of differences between Black, Latino, and white kids, but differences in the structures that they're in. And so when we think about equity as an issue of Black males need something different, we usually fall off the mark. That's when we start to put metal detectors in Black schools but not in white schools. Or we put police officers in Black schools but not in white schools. Because we see some of these disparities and we see that as a problem with the kid, but we're not looking at the larger structures. So I think that the standards does give a fair amount of commentary towards the desire to have equitable systems, and I appreciate that about it. The part of this that I was the most positively disposed to was the conditions of teaching and learning, because I see a lot of those elements as being things that are absent from a lot of the schools that educate the largest percentage of Black and Latino kids. a lot of them aren't in schools currently that have that positive environment, and where there's a premium on whole child development, and not just teaching to test, but socializing them through sports and athletics and extracurricular activities, competition and science fairs and clubs and different things like that. And they don't have the same amount of opportunities to have positive relationship with their teachers, because a lot of their teachers just kind of come in and leave out, and they're not really engaged in a lot of other aspects of the school. A lot of the teachers also have a lot of stereotypes about the kids that they're teaching in a lot of these schools. And so it leads to a lot of misconceptions and people just not being able to relate to each other very well. And in the research that I've done, I found that having a teacher respect who you are is one of the most important things that a young black male rates when they rate their teachers. So it's not necessarily teachers that know the information the most or teachers that give extra help, but teachers who are able to validate them for who they are. So that's very, very important. Other ways in which my research is compatible with this, college and career readiness is something that I've promoted a lot in my research, and I see that they have it here. One of the inequity things that we have to face in this nation is that a lot of the schools that educate the largest percentage of Black and Latino kids omit key classes like Algebra 2, physics, calculus, and then in the last report that I did, I talked about public reciprocity and education for post-secondary success, and looking at the dynamic of having public universities having admission standards that are out of sync with public schools that kids are assigned to. So that's a situation like with University of Maryland, College Park, which requires 4 units of science. So you have to have a physics to get in, but yet among the schools that educate the largest percentage of Black and Latino kids, less than half of them actually have physics. So you're basically omitting some kids from contention. So I've always had a desire to hear large organizations and the state really take a strong position on that. I would like to see someone say that this should be against the law to assign a kid to a school that doesn't meet the proper, that doesn't have the curriculum that's compatible with a state university, because they're both being supported by the state.
Okay, we're in. Against the law, you said?
Okay.
Yeah, we're in.
All right, good. I'll say we'll talk more about that. Final thing I'll say is another thing that I would like to see organizations like NEA do is have a campaign to bring back the GPA. All right, because the GPA is being, is under assault by people who are pushing testing and other agendas that's not in favor of us. But the GPA kicks every other metric's butt when it comes to, performance in college. And I don't care what school you go to. You can go to an underperforming school. If you have a high GPA at that school, research shows that you have a better chance of doing well in college than someone who goes to a high-performing school with a low GPA. But yet, we have people from the outside saying, well, the GPA doesn't mean anything. There's grade inflation, all this kind of stuff. And, a lot of times I see progressive organizations taking their hits on that, when I would like to see us fight back and say the GPA has integrity and it means a whole lot more than these tests. And if we could, sure, there's some ways in which the integrity of the GPA could be improved, but it is the best thing that we have, and so we're going to stand behind it. And we're not going to replace the GPA with some outside testing companies that's going to come in and bring up artificial measures where the GPA is a lot more authentic. So those are some of the.
Wow, we need to. That's a whole nother conversation and panel. So we'll be convening that soon enough. I mean, it's part of the reason why we focus so much on multiple measures to try to get away from that single measure of student success or school success for that matter. And part of the impetus behind developing multiple criteria to define what a great public school is. Thank you, Ivory. If anyone has a question, please go ahead to the mic. So Marty, talk to us a little bit about community schools. I've had an opportunity to visit many of them, and for us, particularly with the first criteria, providing the services and programs that students need, from mental health to dental care, I mean, just to having glasses when they need them. I mean, it seems simple, but we have so many kids who do not have that and are being held to high standards, and they cannot see the words on the page. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Before I do, I want to tell a story related to what Ivory just said about the University of Maryland. Because in Los Angeles County, in LAUSD, they had the same problem. And they had an education organizing work going out there with young people, right? So how can young people's voice be heard more clearly in education policy circles? And when the young people began to look at going to college, what they discovered was that the public schools of the Los Angeles Unified School District, and you may know this story, were not offering the courses that young people needed to get into the Cal State system. Never mind the university system, right? There's a big UC Berkeley and all that. And then there's all these Cal State schools. And so they fought and they got the policy changed. Now, those same people, those same education organizers, to segue to your question, Becky, are now working with our colleagues in Los Angeles to create community schools, as are organizers in Philadelphia trying to fight back against what I think are the most egregious inequities in our entire society, in the quote, quote, cradle of liberty and the first home of our national government. So we are trying to create schools that return to their role as resources and central institutions in their communities, that are really rooted in place. And we've shifted away from that. Here in the District of Columbia, some people have talked about how it would be great if we never had another neighborhood school again. Come to Chevy Chase, Maryland, where I'm lucky enough to live, and tell us that. You know, tell us that our kids are going to go all around, and our schools are no longer going to be central. So what we are trying to do is organize the whole community around the school. So there are pieces of this framework that are very strong in that regard. I was particularly pleased to see the focus on contextualized learning. And for us, that means partnerships in the learning enterprise. So all the STEM thrust that's out there is all about working with businesses, working with universities. Teachers need to be able to work effectively with others. In our community schools in LA, they've got partnerships with the Huntington Library and Museum, with business and technology groups, and with others. They've also got the health community people saying to the health community, another disparity, right? Poor kids of color, poor kids in general have worse asthma rates. Bad asthma rates lead to high attendance, high absence rates. How do you solve that problem? Well, you don't solve it unless you work with the community. 25% of kids suffer from eye problems. As a double retinal detachee, I understand eye problems and how it makes you difficult. Why can't we solve that? They put an eye clinic, the first eye clinic in the nation, in a public school in one of the toughest urban Appalachian neighborhoods in the city of Cincinnati. If you want to go look at white urban poverty, go to Cincinnati and go look at what goes on Lower Price Hill. So what we've seen, though, and what's important, Becky, is that what we're seeing is school districts, United Ways, community foundations, business leaders, mayors, county officials working to come together, because we've got a lot of work going on with, we see cradle to career initiatives and a lot of indicator measurement, how kids are doing at the regional level. But the real game, the ground game, is in a place called school. And there we are seeing community partners work together with schools in intentional ways. But frankly, it can't happen on a school-by-school basis. Let me put it differently. It must happen on a school-by-school basis, but it will only reach scale when policy leaders in local communities embrace the idea that all of the community's resources are best used when they're aligned with the goal of educating our children. And so from Oakland to Cincinnati to New York City, de Blasio has been to Cincinnati, is very excited about this work. We work closely with your colleagues at the United Federation of Teachers, the Ohio Federation of Teachers, and with the NEA to promote this concept. But it takes bringing people together and using these kinds of standards to say, are our schools doing what we need them to do? How can the whole community, how can our partners help? And to keep the focus on results. Right? I don't want to move away from results. I don't want to move away. But I think we have to understand the dynamic of all of that. So when you talk about attendance as you do, and I'll talk later about that particular, when we have high rates of chronic absence in this country, correct? Everybody now knows about chronic absence because of the great work that Hetty Chang has done, all right? Why are so many kids absent from school? Excused and unexcused, right? There are lots of kids who get excuses and they're not in school, but if they're missing 20 days a year, then they're chronically absent and they are A, not learning, and B, disrupting all the learning of all the other children. So is that just a school problem? Do we need attendance officers knocking on doors? Or do we need social workers and other parents on the block and mental health providers and others trying to understand what the challenge is that families face? That's what we're trying to do with community schools. Because guess what? Just like the GPA tells us that that's a good indicator, research tells us that when kids go to school, they learn more. How about that? But lots of them don't. In high school, what are the attendance rates in high schools? I mean, I see you in places, some cities you hear 60%, 65%. In elementary schools, we have 18, 20, and 30% chronic absence. We even have chronic absence in pre-K programs that we fight so hard for because parents don't understand how important it is to bring their children into pre-K. So we've got to understand that we've got to create a more organic approach that what we've done in the last 20 years, 30 years is to create what we think are more rigid and more efficient kinds of places. Right? Yes, we need rigor, but we have to be very careful, and I'm sure some people will be upset with this, that we don't add the second word that usually goes with rigor to what happens in schools, right? Most of us think about rigor and we think about rigor mortis, right? Well, schools can't be like that. They've got to be open, flexible, responsive, engaging, welcoming kinds of places. And that's what we're trying to do with community schools.
Great. Chanel, and we have a question at the mic. Go ahead.
My point will be quick. I recognize that I didn't address the question of where there's alignment. So I wanted to note that we do have a plan for, we call the 8-point plan to employ, educate, and empower. That's on our website, and there's significant alignment here, especially in funding, access to, how do you refer to it, early childhood education, school readiness, definitely around teacher effectiveness and family and community engagement. And the additional piece I just wanted to just flag was you talked about Common Core at the beginning of your remarks, and I just wonder if it might be a missed opportunity not to address it here, since I know that NEA is focused on how we make this work for our schools and our communities. The National Urban League is supportive of Common Core for the reasons that Ivory talked about in terms of too many of our students getting to college and not being able to succeed. As we all know, the conversation right now around Higher Education Act reauthorization, there's lots of folks saying, you know, that the access question has been tried and we don't need to focus on it anymore, and to really be, that's not us, for the record, unless there was any doubt. And a lot of what we're hearing is all of these findings and reports and studies about which types of students don't graduate. And is it worth investing in these types of students? What types of students? Students who require more than 3 remedial classes when they get to college, because we know they won't graduate. Students who spend more than 2 years in community college. Students who don't have the, who in any way come into college underprepared, so that they can't graduate in 4 to 6 years. And so I just think that since this is going to be such a big, it is a big and will continue to be such a big conversation. If it's not something that, if it's something that I know it is, where NEA has a position and is focused on breaking it down for the community, as we are with the parent and community guide we're working on, I think kind of you can preemptively address some of the response by talking about taking it on head on.
Okay.
That's very helpful. We have a question at the mic. Please tell us who you are.
Sure. Charles Brown from Teach for America. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the organization. But I want to step outside of that for a second because I definitely can't make any comment about the framework, having just received it on behalf of the organization. But my mother was the first Black woman principal of our high school in Baltimore. And so I can say with confidence that she would glowingly endorse the 7 indicators that are in the framework. My question is, however, that I'm also confident that she would say, as the major change agent in her high school, that she couldn't do all 7. And so she couldn't focus on all 7. It was just impossible. There's just way too much to do in order to, and there's significant resources need to be levered on each one of those indicators that there just wasn't enough time in the day for her to handle that. So I guess the question is, and it's kind of directed towards Dr. Toldson, and that is the issue about developing a companion guide. Would that companion guide also kind of give indication in terms of which stakeholders might take on some indicators and which ones might take on other indicators, specifically because we don't want states doing it all, we don't want the federal government doing it all, and we certainly don't want one school leader or a couple of school leaders in a school trying to handle all of these indicators.
Excellent question. And Ivory, if I could add to that question as you address it, do you think, because you're absolutely correct, do you think that we should focus one place first? Or would you prioritize them as you answer that question?
Yeah, and I think it's an excellent point. I think the thing that we would need to do in crafting the companion guide is line by line. But in my own interpretation of it and weighing that against the things that I hear from some of the individual schools that I work with, a lot of the things that appear to be within the control of the school is the way that they engage parents. And there are some schools that that present in such a way that they have no control over their parents. But one thing I know is that schools that have very concerted efforts to engage parents, that communicate with their parents about both positive and negative things about their kids, schools that create opportunities for parents to be proud of their kids, schools that take pictures of the parents and post them on the wall and say, you know, we love our parents, schools that take the burden of having to understand their children's homework away from them and say, we just need you to set the space, but if they don't understand, we'll take care of that. You know, so all of these things have demonstrated effectiveness. So these are some things that I think should be in the guide so that schools know what their obligation is. But, you know, sometimes things like whether or not they have breakfast programs, which I also see in this guide. I think breakfast programs are critically important. But I also understand that sometimes administrators don't have as much control over that as they would like to have. So, you know, I really appreciate the question. But I think that the most important thing is to talk to the teachers, talk to administrators, and come up with a guide that helps to suit their interests while also helping them to understand
capacity building guideline for states who've mostly been involved in, following federal guidelines instead of taking the leadership, and districts. So I thought, and just correct me if I'm wrong, I thought these were indicators for the institutions at the state and the district level to be able to go through and see what their staff of people at those levels could be doing in various ways, certainly not a single person at a single building. So is that what it's designed for?
Absolutely, but the question is a good one. I mean, as we, for example, develop those companion guides and we put it out as this framework, and there are folks, leaders in our schools and our communities who want to take that on, it's huge. There's just no question about it, and we certainly don't want to present it in a way that is so overwhelming that they think if we can't start everywhere, we shouldn't start anywhere. So that I mean, it was an important point to raise. You're absolutely correct, but it's an important point to raise. And it's not like I planted Marty to say this, but I'm all about partnerships. And so I would add to the answer that Ivory gave you, we cannot do this alone. Your mother can't do it alone. The NEA can't do it alone. As big and powerful as we are, we can't do it alone. And so it absolutely is going to take the entire community to help us get at these pieces that we think are absolutely essential. And so I appreciate that Marty kept going back to that. And that's the way we're going to try to take this on. So I'm going to ask, and we're going to start with Stella because I know she wanted to say something. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to make some final comments, and you can say whatever you want to, Chanel, when you get to talk, particularly, but I do want you to at least say something about the partnering with the National Urban League and other organizations and how that can help us in a huge way. And I point that out as I look in the audience, and I want to introduce the director of our Minority Community and Outreach and Partnerships, Organizing and Partnerships Department, Merwin Scott. Raise your hand, Merwin. Give him a hand. And I introduced him because I know that he played a role in bringing some of our panelists here because our outreach to the ethnic minority community in particular is absolutely essential in this work, and you heard that theme coming out over and over and over again. So I'm going to have Stella go first, and then I'll have Marty, and then Chanel, and Ivory, how about if you finish?
Okay, thank you. I have a number of areas where we'd like to address. Within the breakout sessions, we can do that. We don't have enough time here. Not that I have so many, but we do want to make sure we address some of our concerns in several areas. But I must say that the alignment issue is an issue that is heavily discussed and being addressed around the country. Just listening to Education Nation this weekend, to listen to governors and school superintendents and other stakeholders talk about this connection, especially with high school curriculum and universities. So you'd be encouraged to know that. And another comment about the standards that we're all facing across the country now in one way or the other, either whether it's Common Core state standards, other standards that some states have and feel that they have enough rigor and relevance that they don't need to adopt them, but still standards nevertheless, which is just the what we need to do, where we need to be, but the question of the how, the curriculum building and all of this, I think this is where the framework may be very helpful at every level, because it's the locals who will have to determine how to meet those standards, which is rather refreshing once again in the education arena. But let me just address one area within the standard that has to do with the data collection, which is a really big piece. Even in Common Core and other areas right now, a lot of parents and community stakeholders are very concerned about data collection. And one of the indicators, it talks about the percentage of districts that collect parent and caregiver feedback. So when we talk about any type of feedback, the big antenna goes up, data collection. So whether it's feedback, data collection, we just think it's important that everyone understands what is being collected and why it's being collected. So to know what you're collecting, know why it's going to be used is extremely important, and that should be stated very clearly here. Okay?
Great. Thank you, Stella.
You're welcome.
Marty?
Thank you, Becky, for having me again. I really appreciate it. The NEA is a very vital partner in our work, and your voice is so important in getting to the kind of public schools we need. Just a couple of things. If we're going to have the kinds of institutions that I believe all of us want, then we need to, we need your help in not only changing how they get prepared, but in how they view the perspective, see the community, and see families when they're on the job. I mean, there are big barriers, big gaps that have to be closed. We've got a wonderful home visiting program here in the 6th district that has helped to turn around the school, but you talk to a lot of teachers, and home visiting is something that they, kind of get a little bit concerned about. But it changes the relationship. It's nothing is a panacea, but it changes the relationship. So I think one of the things I would hope you would think about, and I know you do, is what does this mean for how we interact with our own membership and their own relationship with community? That's number one. Number two, my sense is that when we identify these indicators, our friend's mother in Baltimore is going to, too often educators, your mother being one example, take it on themselves to think that, what are we going to do? How are we going to solve this problem? Rather than really trying to understand, what does the data tell us? And then secondly, what's the story behind the problem? Right? It's not all data. There are human beings living real lives in real neighborhoods with real challenges, with lots of hopes and dreams. And we've got to understand that story and then figure out who can help us, and maybe partners can help us understand the story and solve the problem. So it is not all on our public schools, and that must be made very, very, very clear. And then just the last point about alignment. We talk a lot about alignment in our work. I worry that we're trying to make it like the interlocking parts of the space station, right? And that's not going to be possible in a dynamic human enterprise like public education. Alignment, as I learned it originally from Peter Senge, who wrote a wonderful book called The Fifth Discipline about organizational life in businesses in the public sector, shows charts where everybody's heading in a different direction, right? But alignment for him is everybody being in the same space, moving in the same direction. It's not that everybody is interlocking. It's not that anyone is in charge of everybody, but that everybody has a shared vision. Everybody understands where they're going. And then the alignment will emerge from the power of the relationships that people have with each other. And that human side, the political, small p political, relational side of public education can, in fact, drive much more of what happens, particularly for our neediest children.
Thank you. Chanel.
Okay, Becky, you wanted me to address the partnership with third-party groups like the National Urban League. First, I want to recognize Merwin and say that he's doing a great job for you all. And because of the relationship that he's cultivated with me and other colleagues in the civil rights community, we can come to a conversation where there is not perfect alignment, and look for those areas of alignment. And one thing I would say about the National Urban League is, our president says it all the time, we want to work with everyone because our goal is economic power, parity, and civil rights. And we're impatient about that goal. For the past 10 years, we've been publishing inequality index as part of our State of Black America to see how we're doing. And it's been disappointing to see that we've been stubbornly at about 70% for the past 10 years. So it might go up a little bit because we all came out in droves to vote President Obama into office, and so our civic engagement indicators went up. But then we have the recession, and we lose our homes and our wealth in one blow, and it goes back down. And so regardless of this kind of movement, it stays around 70%. Actually, one of the areas that we're doing better is education. But one of the areas that is stubbornly resistant is our economic parity. And so we see these two as inextricably linked, which is why our education plan is to employ and educate and empower. power. And so I would say a couple of things. One, with the alignment, we definitely know that there is great work that we can do together. We look forward to partnering on so many of these common struggles. As community-based organizations, I think we all feel the same pain right now in this budget-cutting environment. Conversations, so much of this and so much of what we talk about has to do with investments, which is like a dangerous word to use nowadays. It's not about investments, it's about efficiencies, it's about cutting, it's about retargeting and redirecting, and we all have lots to lose in that conversation. And so we're definitely allies in that fight with you. And we're also, like you, putting children first. And putting teachers first, because we also recognize that keeping teachers in quality work environments and providing them the protections that they deserve is an economic issue. And so it's all circular, and none of it can be separated and success for our community be maintained. So I think the biggest takeaway that I would have from this conversation, or I say to leave behind, is definitely continue to reach out to us, because we can be very powerful and effective allies on the issues that we know are most important to our community. But also know that we will challenge you, just like we challenge our corporate partners, our other nonprofit partners, whenever we feel like the focus slips from our urgency on closing the gap. We've been working on educational parity for a lot of years now as a country. And when we have these conversations, it's taken almost as a given that we're going to start out. All of us could have done it, and I think it's to our credit, none of us did, with just going through all the numbers about how much worse children of color continue to do. But I think that we have to get to the point where that's just unacceptable to us. And like, take all of these indicators as ways to say, we're going to make all schools great public schools, and we're going to put a special urgency in closing those gaps. So one last point I'd make, I had the privilege to go to China last year, and I thought it was very interesting, not making any endorsements of China's education policy, but they did say that they have 98 ethnic minority groups, and then there are 2 that are the majority of the population. And for those that are in the minority groups, because they are combined in their goal that they want to have the most competitive workforce in the world, they give them extra instruction, extra school days. They save extra spaces in college and credentialing programs for them. So they're actually getting more, because the goal is a uniformly competitive workforce. And I think so much of our conversation can be about equity to the exclusion of real justice and closing gaps and bringing people that have been waiting a long time to parity.
Thank you, Chanel. And actually, before I ask...
I have one comment. Enjoy your breakouts. That's my comment.
Excellent. Let me just say that the comment that Chanel made around the priority being on our schools and children of greatest need is something that we take very seriously. And so I do want to introduce the director of our Priority Schools program, Andrea Prejean. Andrea, stand up and wave your hand there. Thank you. And so with Ivory setting us up, first of all, let me ask you to join me in thanking this incredible panel. They gave us fabulous insights and direction and a whole lot more work. And now we want you to engage, want you to roll up your sleeves and engage a little bit with these indicators, because we know that these 4 folks here up on the stage are not the only experts who are gathered in this room today. And so we want to hear from you. We have facilitators at every table who are going to be working with you as you have some conversations, so you can inform our thinking, and we can answer any additional questions you might have, so we can take the next steps for this work. So I'm going to ask you to kind of swing your chairs around in your circular tables and begin discussing with your facilitators. Facilitators at each table, just wave your hand, please. Wave your hand so folks at your table see you. And I'm going to, very good, excellent. Okay, discuss amongst yourselves. So, continue your conversations. Our facilitators will be here, still continuing to gather your really, really good thoughts. They are capturing them so that we can come back together and learn from what you've told us. And we have an ask. So the lunch is not free, particularly you guys up here. And our ask is that you will allow us to reach back out to you, not only to share the collective wisdom that came out of this last 25 minutes or so, but also to join us in this journey in aligning our collective movements so we can get to where we need to get, so that our kids get what they deserve and what they need to be successful. So thank you for joining us, and please, by all means, go out to the hall and get some sustenance. Thank you so very much.